Hey listener, welcome. I'm glad you could join me tonight. I'm your storyteller and I'll be your companion as you drift off to sleep, or perhaps as you lie there wide awake listening to this story, unsure if you'll ever fall asleep again. I've always lived a pretty normal life. Well, that's what I thought, at least. I'm a 27-year-old graphic designer living in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside the city. The kind of place where the lawns are perfectly manicured and the biggest excitement is the neighbor's dog barking a little too much. My days were simple. Wake up, work, run errands, watch Netflix. Pretty ordinary, right? Nothing ever really felt out of the ordinary. I was used to the stillness of suburbia. But then, there was the house across the street. It had been vacant for as long as I could remember. A house with peeling white paint, overgrown ivy crawling up the side of it, and broken shutters that would bang loudly in the wind. It always seemed like something from a ghost story, old, abandoned, yet alive in a way. The kind of house that looked like it might tell you secrets if you stared at it long enough. But that wasn't the strangest thing. It started a few weeks ago, right around the time the weather turned cold. Every single night, without fail, at exactly 3:11 a.m., a single light would flicker on in that house, just one light. A pale yellow glow that spilled out from the window of the second-floor bedroom. And it wasn't like someone had just forgotten to turn it off. No, it would turn on exactly at that time. I'd wake up for a glass of water, and there it would be, that faint glow in the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe the power was faulty, or someone had moved in and kept odd hours. But the more I saw it, the weirder it felt. I told myself it was nothing. But every night, I'd lie in bed, staring at that light through my bedroom window, unable to sleep, my mind racing. And then came the day when I decided to do something about it. One evening, I stood in my living room, staring across the street. It was just past midnight, and the house looked more desolate than ever. No light, just darkness. But as I stood there, something strange happened. One of the curtains in that upstairs window shifted, just a crack, barely noticeable, like someone had peered out from behind it. My heart skipped. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe a shadow. But the feeling didn't go away. That light came on again the next night at exactly 3:11 a.m. I could see the curtain shift again, just for a moment, and then it was gone. I knew I had to check it out. The next night, at 3:11 a.m., I pulled on my hoodie and grabbed my phone. I crossed the street, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. The house was completely still, and I didn't hear any sounds coming from it. I stood across the street, just watching. The light flickered on again, but this time there was no movement behind the curtain. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the lawn. The grass was damp beneath my shoes. The air smelled like wet leaves and earth. As I approached the front door, I felt a chill race down my spine. I stood there for a moment, staring at the peeling paint on the door, wondering if I should knock. But before I could, I noticed something. The second-floor curtain had moved again. Only this time, the gap was wider. Someone was definitely looking out. I couldn't see their face, but the silhouette of a figure in the dim light was unmistakable. My stomach flipped. My first thought was to run back home, but something kept me rooted to the spot. It felt like something bigger than just a creepy neighbor. It felt personal, like I'd been noticed. I walked closer to the window. I tried to look inside, but it was pitch black. No furniture, no lights, nothing. Just an empty room. But then, in the darkness, I noticed something even more unnerving. The curtain moved again. Someone was definitely behind it, staring down at me. I took a step back, a knot tightening in my chest. That's when I heard it. A creak from inside the house. the unmistakable sound of a floorboard, someone walking, the weight of it echoing through the silence. I didn't know what to do. I should have run. I should have knocked on a neighbor's door, called the police, something. But I couldn't. My feet were glued to the ground, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making sense. I turned and walked away quickly, making my way back across the street to my house. But even as I stepped into the safety of my living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that I had been watched. And that night, as I lay in bed, the same thing happened again. 3:11 a.m., that light flickering on. Only this time I couldn't look away. I couldn't close my eyes. I stayed awake, staring at the window, waiting for the next move. The next night, I didn't wait. I got up at 3:11 a.m., grabbed my phone, and walked across the street. The house was silent. No lights, no sounds. But then I heard something muffled, a faint murmur from inside the house. My breath hitched, and I pressed my ear against the cold wooden door. I had to know who was in there. I knocked. For a moment, there was nothing. Silence. Then the door creaked open, just a crack. A voice, barely above a whisper, said, "You're too late." I froze. My heart pounded and my hand shook, but I couldn't look away. I didn't move, didn't dare speak. The door slowly closed, the sound echoing in my ears like a death knell. The next morning, I called the police. They found nothing. No one. The house was empty. The light has never come on again. And I can't explain why, but sometimes I wonder if they're still watching. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night at exactly 3:11 a.m., and I swear I hear the faintest creak of a floorboard. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens, it's knowing it could happen again. Story 2. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a new town, a quiet street, and a chance to finally settle down. I remember the day we moved in. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the sun tries to peek through the trees but can't quite make it. My wife, Sarah, and our 2 kids, Ben, who was 6, and Lily, who was 4, were all excited to get out of the cramped apartment we'd been living in for the past few years. The house was small, but it felt like a step up. We'd been eyeing this quiet cul-de-sac for months, charmed by its calm vibe, no noise, no rush, just peaceful suburban living. When we arrived, the neighbors were all out welcoming us with smiles. Their lawns were pristine, their homes neat. The whole street felt like something out of a picture book. We didn't think much of it, at least not at first. The house we moved into was at the very end of the street, almost like it was tucked away from everything else. The previous owners had kept it in good shape, but there was an odd emptiness about it. The air felt still, like it had been waiting for us to arrive. Maybe it was just me being weird, but I couldn't shake that feeling. It was the neighbors who got me curious, though. They were friendly enough at first, but there was something off about their smiles. They were quick to mention that the street was very quiet, too quiet, and that it was best to stay inside after dark. "You'll hear her tonight," Mrs. Doran, the lady from across the street, said when I asked why. "Just don't look outside." I remember chuckling nervously, thinking it was some sort of weird suburban joke. But then, when I asked the others, they all gave me the same look, quiet, serious. They nodded. "You'll hear her tonight." I thought they were just trying to make us feel welcome in that strange, overly polite way that new neighbors do. But then, things started to happen. The first night we were there, it was just like any other. The house creaked, the kids were asleep, and Sarah and I settled on the couch to relax after the long move. But around 11 p.m., I heard something. It started faintly at first, like the sound of a woman crying. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone was having a bad night, I thought. I couldn't see anything through the blinds, but the sound was so clear, so desperate. It wasn't just a cry. It was like a wail, a longing, something that didn't belong in a peaceful neighborhood like this. I ignored it, figuring it would stop, but it didn't. The next night, it happened again, and this time, it was closer, like it was coming from somewhere right outside my window. I told Sarah I thought I heard someone crying, but she just shrugged it off. She was tired, and honestly, I didn't know what to make of it myself. But then the next night, things escalated. I was sitting in the kitchen, late, trying to get some work done while Sarah and the kids slept upstairs. The street was silent, just like it had been the night before, but I kept glancing out the window, almost as if I was waiting for something to happen. And then I saw her. At the far end of the street, just barely visible under the dim streetlight, stood a woman. She was facing the road, standing completely still. It was as if she wasn't even breathing. Her silhouette was vague, but there was something eerie about her posture, like she was waiting for something or someone. I couldn't look away. I just stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was she doing out there? I thought. I wanted to call out to her, ask if she needed help, but I was frozen. I told myself it was probably one of the neighbors, just out for a late walk. But why would someone stand there in the middle of the night, in the cold? Suddenly, she turned, and for a split second, I could see her face. She was pale, almost sickly looking, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right into mine. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I jumped back, heart racing. My breathing quickened, and I didn't know what to do. Should I go outside? Should I call the police? I told myself it was just some strange coincidence. Maybe I was overthinking it. But when I looked back outside, she was gone, like she had never been there at all. The next day, I told Sarah about it. She didn't seem too worried, just that maybe it was a neighbor doing something odd, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The other neighbors didn't mention her, though. They just gave me the same cryptic advice. You'll hear her tonight. Don't look outside. It kept happening. Every night, the crying, the woman standing at the end of the street. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But the worst part, it wasn't just the woman. It was the sense that something was always watching. I started noticing things around the house that weren't right. Small things at first. A door left ajar, lights flickering, items out of place. The kind of things that you could dismiss if you weren't already on edge. But I couldn't help it. My mind kept racing. One night, after hearing the woman's cry again, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, opened the blinds, and looked out. I wasn't going to let whatever was out there scare me. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. The woman was standing right outside my window, not at the end of the street, not across the yard. She was standing just a few feet away, staring right up at me, her face as pale as the moonlight. I froze. I wanted to run, wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. It was like she was inside my head, like she had control over me. I don't know how long we stood there, but it felt like hours. Finally, she turned away, slowly, and then she vanished into the dark, like she'd never been there at all. I called the Ordas police that night. They came, took a look around, and found nothing. No signs of anyone being there, nothing. The worst part, I kept hearing her cry even after the police left. That's when I realized I wasn't just being haunted by a woman, I was being stalked. Someone knew we were new here, someone had been watching us for weeks, and they knew exactly how to get to me. We left the next morning. I packed up everything and we drove far away, far from that cul-de-sac. We never looked back. But I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, waiting. Maybe it's just me. But sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel safe again. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happened. It's knowing it could happen again. Story 3. I know how this sounds. It sounds like something straight out of one of those creepy YouTube videos you'd watch on a quiet late night when you can't sleep. You know, the ones that start with, "You won't believe what happened to me." But this isn't some made-up story. This happened to me, and I still can't explain what happened. I'm Jason, by the way. I was 27 when it started, living in a small, quiet neighborhood just outside of town. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone and nothing much ever happens. People go to work, kids play in the yard, and at night, the only sounds are crickets and the occasional dog barking. Normal. Boring, even. I had a decent job at a local tech firm. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. I lived alone. My parents were an hour away, so it was just me and the same routine every day. Wake up, go to work, come home, watch a show or read a book, go to bed. Nothing ever disrupted that, until the van showed up. It wasn't a big deal at first. I didn't even notice it right away. It started off with me coming home from work one afternoon and seeing a white van parked across the street, just sitting there. But the thing was, it wasn't like any other car I'd seen before. It was an old beat-up van, like the kind you might see in a horror movie, the kind that looks out of place, like it doesn't belong. But whatever, I told myself. It's probably just some delivery van or maybe a neighbor's friend. But then it stayed, for days. A week passed and it was still there, parked in the same spot. Not once did I see anyone get in or out. No one walked up to it, no one opened the door. It was just there, parked on the curb, as though it was a part of the scenery now. I didn't think much of it. People leave cars on the street all the time, right? That was until something strange started happening every night. It started at midnight. Exactly. I don't know why I noticed it at first, but one night I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard the sound of an engine. It wasn't loud, just a low hum. I looked out the window, and there it was, the van. The engine was running, but no one was inside, and it only ran for exactly 13 seconds. I remember feeling uneasy. The engine cut off just as suddenly as it started, and then nothing. A few moments later, the lights in every house on the block flickered just for a second. Then they came back on. At first, I thought it was a weird coincidence. Maybe it was just a malfunction, or maybe a neighbor had something going on with their electrical wiring. But then it happened again the next night, and the next, and the night after that. I started to get paranoid. I kept telling myself that it was nothing, just a glitch in the system. But then, one night, something different happened. I was lying in bed like I always did when I heard the engine start again. But this time, it was louder. It sounded like it was idling longer than usual. I watched from my window as the van sat there, engine running, not moving. It was so quiet, too quiet. I could hear the hum of the engine, but nothing else. No car passing by, no distant chatter, just this unnatural silence, hanging over everything. And then, I saw. The curtains in the van moved. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but there was no wind that night. The curtains, they weren't just swaying. They moved as though someone had pulled them open. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just paranoid. I wasn't imagining things. Someone was watching us, watching me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that van. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I wanted to look away, to turn back, go to bed, and pretend it wasn't happening, but I couldn't. I didn't even notice the time passing. Before I knew it, I'd been standing there for an hour, watching, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The van just stayed there, the engine running, the curtains moving. I wanted to go outside to confront whoever was in that van, but I didn't. Something told me not to. And then, after about a week of the same thing happening every night, I did something I shouldn't have. I called the cops. I told them about the van, about the engine running at midnight, about the lights flickering, about the curtains. They didn't take me seriously. The officer I spoke to laughed it off, said I was probably just imagining things. I tried to explain it again, but he just brushed me off, telling me there was nothing they could do without a solid lead. I was left with nothing. No answers. No help. A few nights later, something happened that I'll never forget. I'd just fallen asleep when I was woken up by the sound of something at my door. A knock. Soft at first, then louder, more persistent. My heart raced as I slowly got out of bed. I wasn't expecting anyone. I had no idea who could be knocking at this hour. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. Just the silence of the night. Then, as I stood there, trying to decide what to do, I heard something. It was faint at first, but it got louder. The sound of the van's engine. It was running again, but this time it was different. It was closer. I felt a chill run down my spine. My pulse quickened. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call the police again, but I knew they wouldn't help. I thought about running, about leaving, but I couldn't bring myself to move. For hours, I stayed awake, glued to that door, waiting. I don't know what I was waiting for. Something told me that if I opened that door, I'd find something I wasn't ready to see. But I didn't have to open it. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because when I woke up, the van was gone. It was just gone. No one saw it leave. No one saw anything. But the weird part? The lights still flickered every night for the next week. The engine still ran every night at midnight for exactly 13 seconds. And I still don't know who was in that van or what they were doing. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I can still hear the sound of that engine idling in the distance. And I wonder, will it ever stop? Sometimes the scariest part of all this isn't what happened. It's knowing that it could happen again and that I might never know why. Story 4. I don't know if I've ever told anyone this story before. I'm not sure I could without sounding completely insane. It started out so normal, so safe. But looking back, I can't help but wonder if something's been wrong all along. My name's Sarah, and at the time of this story, I was 23 years old. I lived in a suburban neighborhood not too far from the city, the kind of place where every house looked the same. Neatly manicured lawns, white fences, and houses with picture-perfect porches. It was the kind of neighborhood you could walk down the street without locking your doors, where everything seemed peaceful, almost boring. And that's what I loved about it. No surprises, no excitement, just quiet. I had just moved into my first place, a small 2-bedroom apartment right off a quiet cul-de-sac. Nothing spectacular, but it was mine. My first real taste of independence. I worked as a graphic designer doing freelance stuff, so I spent most of my time at home, either working or binge-watching shows in the evenings. And that's where I met them. The neighbors. They were the kind of people that made you feel like you were supposed to be better somehow, even without trying. The kind that smiled too brightly and waved a little too enthusiastically when you walked past their house. Their names were Bob and Lisa, middle-aged, always dressed like they had just stepped out of a magazine photo shoot. Bob had this perfectly combed hair, a gleaming smile, and wore these crisply ironed button-up shirts that looked fresh out of a catalog. Lisa was always perfectly put together, her blonde hair in soft waves, and she never wore a single wrinkle on her clothes. They were polite, friendly, perfect, really. At first, I thought nothing of it. I'd wave back, say a quick, "Hello," and go about my day. But there was something about them that felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Their smiles were a little too wide, their eyes a little too bright. Maybe I was just being paranoid, I thought. But then there was the thing that really started to bug me. They never seemed to age. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I swear, in the year that I lived there, Bob and Lisa looked exactly the same. Not a single wrinkle more, not a single hair graying, not even a change in their posture. It was like time had just stopped for them. But what really shook me to my core happened one night when I got home late from work. It was just after midnight, and I was exhausted. As I parked my car in the driveway, I glanced over at their house. There was a light on in the living room, always. But this time, I noticed something different. Bob and Lisa were standing in the window, facing me. Their smiles, they were so wide, too wide. It wasn't the same pleasant greeting they always gave, but something more. Forced, almost mechanical. I shook it off, telling myself I was just too tired and imagining things. But then I heard it. It was subtle at first, like a low murmur coming from their house. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like whispering. But not just whispering. It was as though they were practicing something, a rhythm, a pattern, a perfect harmony. It went on for a while, so faint I could barely hear it over the hum of my fridge. I thought about calling the cops. I even got up to look out the window, but the instant I moved, the sound stopped. Dead silence. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was hearing things, I thought. I'd been working long hours, after all. I'd never heard anything like that before, but surely it was nothing. The next few days were uneventful. Bob and Lisa greeted me like usual, smiling, chatting briefly. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt that weird unease growing inside me. It wasn't just their smiles, it was everything. And then, it happened again. It was the same night, just past midnight, when I heard it once more. This time, it was clearer. The soft, rhythmic sound of voices, practicing. And that's when I realized they were practicing their smiles. I watched them through my window. They were standing in the exact same position, their faces stretched wide, mimicking that same perfect smile over and over again, as though they were rehearsing it. Their eyes, though, they weren't quite right. They were empty, vacant, like someone had hollowed them out, leaving only the mask of who they used to be. I felt the blood drain from my face. I thought about running. I thought about leaving. But where would I go? It wasn't like I could just pick up and leave my life behind, and maybe I was just overthinking everything. But as the days went by, the weirdness escalated. Every time I walked past their house, they were standing in the window, smiling that perfect smile at me. No words, just smiles. And that whispering. It grew louder. They were getting bolder. Then one night, I heard something even worse. A knock on my door. Just as I was about to go to bed, there was a soft knock. 1, 2, 3. I opened it. It was Bob. "Just wanted to check in," he said, his voice dripping with too much sweetness. He didn't seem drunk, didn't seem out of breath. He was just there, standing on my porch in his perfect button-up shirt, his perfect smile. Before I could say anything, he looked at me, really looked at me, and it was like I saw past the facade for a moment. There was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Fear, maybe. Desperation. "Stay safe, Sarah," he said, and then he turned and walked away, his steps unnervingly calm. Too calm. I didn't sleep that night. Weeks went by, and the feeling that something was terribly wrong only got stronger. I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't make them believe me. It was like I was losing my mind. Every day felt like it was building to something I couldn't control. One morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I called in sick, packed a bag, and was ready to leave. I was done. But before I could even get to the door, my phone buzzed. A text. It was from Lisa. "We miss you, Sarah. Why don't you come over tonight? We can smile together." That was it. That was when I realized they weren't just weird neighbors. They were watching me. They were trying to pull me into whatever twisted thing they had going on in that house. I ran, left everything behind. I've moved to a new city now, a new life. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers. Sometimes, I think I see them. Bob and Lisa, just standing there in the corner of my vision, smiling, waiting. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, practicing their smiles, waiting for me to come back. And it makes me wonder, could they follow me? I'll never know, but you should be careful too. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happened, it's knowing it could happen again. Story 5. I want to tell you something that still makes me shiver, even now, years after it happened. It wasn't some spooky ghost story or an ancient curse. No, this was far more unsettling because it was real. And if I'm being honest, it still feels like it could happen again at any moment. You see, I never thought anything unusual would happen to me. I lived a pretty quiet life. My name's Claire. I was 29 at the time, living in a sleepy suburban neighborhood just outside of town. I was working a regular office job at a marketing firm, just going through the motions, trying to save enough to buy my first house. It was all the usual suburban stuff. Neighbors I waved to on the way to my car, weekly grocery runs, and the occasional backyard BBQ. Honestly, things were dull, but safe. I liked it that way. But that all changed one night when I heard it for the first time. The whispers. It was late, around 2 a.m. when I first noticed it. The house was quiet, just the usual sounds of creaky floorboards and the hum of the refrigerator. I just finished watching a show and was about to go to bed when I thought I heard something. It was faint at first, like the softest murmur from the backyard. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the wind or maybe an animal. But then it happened again, louder this time, almost as if someone was talking right outside my window. I couldn't make out the words. It was too soft, but there was something wrong about the way it sounded. Too deliberate. Almost like someone was trying to be quiet on purpose. I got up and looked out the window, heart pounding a little faster now. The backyard was dark, just a patch of grass stretching out behind the house. Nothing unusual. No one was there. Still, I felt uneasy. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was alone, it was late, and I was probably just imagining things. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The whispers continued over the next few nights, each time a little closer. At first, it was just faint, like muffled voices coming from the backyard. But after a week or so, it became harder to ignore. I would hear them around the same time each night, soft whispers like a conversation happening just outside the window. Sometimes it would sound like two voices, other times just one. But it was always there. One night, I decided to go out and check. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the backyard, trying to stay calm. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe it was some kids messing around, or maybe an animal making noises. But when I reached the backyard, my stomach sank. There were footprints in the grass. At first, I thought maybe they were from a stray animal, but they were two distinct, clear human prints. And they weren't just there, they were moving. Every night, the prints were a little closer to the house, like someone or something was walking towards me. I remember standing there in the dark, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The whispers had stopped for the moment, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried telling my neighbors. "It's probably just someone's prank," they said, brushing it off. "You've got a big yard, maybe a wild animal." But I didn't believe that. This wasn't some raccoon or fox sneaking around. I could feel it in my gut. Something was coming closer. The whispers didn't stop. It started to feel like someone was stalking me. I'd hear the whispers, and then I'd look outside and see the prints a little bit closer to the house. The fear was growing. Every night I would check, the prints were there, just beyond my back porch, moving closer. One night, I stayed up watching out the window, and that's when I saw it. A figure, a shadow. It moved across the backyard, right where the whispers always came from. But when I turned on the light, nothing was there. Nothing at all. I couldn't explain it. I was terrified. The next few days, I called the police. I even had a few friends come over to check it out with me. But when they arrived, everything seemed normal. The whispers stopped for a while. The footprints disappeared. It was almost like nothing ever happened. But I couldn't forget it. Every time I went to bed, I kept hearing them in my head. The whispers. They were still out there in the shadows. Weeks passed, and I tried to push it all out of my mind. But one night, while I was lying in bed, I heard a knock at the door. A soft, quiet knock. My heart nearly stopped. I froze, my mind racing. Who would be knocking at this hour? I went to the door slowly, heart in my throat. When I opened it, no one was there. But something was on the porch, a single, perfectly placed footprint in the dirt, right on the step. I never saw who it was. I never figured out what was really happening. But the fear never really went away. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, something, was still out there, waiting. I moved shortly after that. I don't live in that house anymore. But every time I hear the sound of someone whispering in the distance, or when I'm in the dark, my heart races. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, still getting closer. And sometimes I think the scariest part isn't what happened. It's knowing it could happen again. So if you're ever in a neighborhood and you start hearing whispers late at night, maybe check the backyard. You never know who or what might be waiting for you. Story 6. I've never been someone to believe in superstitions or any of that nonsense. I mean, I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everything's predictable. The mailman comes at the same time every day. The neighbors wave, the sun sets, and everything carries on without a hitch. Life's just normal. But that was before the letter started. Let me introduce myself first. My name's Mark. I'm 29, and I've lived in this neighborhood for about 4 years now. I work from home, doing graphic design, so my days are spent in front of a screen, sipping on coffee and occasionally checking the mail. Nothing out of the ordinary. I live in a small house with my girlfriend, Ella. We don't have kids, no pets either. It's just the two of us in a neighborhood where you could leave your front door open and no one would steal your mail. That was before it all changed. I remember the first letter clearly. It was a Wednesday, and the sun was just starting to dip behind the houses. I walked out to the mailbox expecting the usual pile of bills and coupons, but there was something else. A thick cream-colored envelope with my name written in neat cursive. Now, normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but this was strange. The handwriting. It didn't look like anyone I knew, And I know every single person in this neighborhood, every one of them. I opened it up. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper. It was typed, not handwritten, with no return address, no signature, just plain text. It said, "Tonight, you'll have pizza for dinner. At exactly 7:45 p.m., Ella will spill a glass of water on the carpet. You will laugh it off, but she'll be frustrated. Then, you'll go for a walk. You'll walk right past Mrs. Harris's house, where she'll wave at you as usual. And after, you'll come back home and watch TV just like you always do." I didn't know what to make of it. I mean, who could possibly know this about me? This was the kind of thing that happened every night. Ella would spill something, I'd laugh, and we'd both go for a walk. The letter described my exact routine, and it made me feel uneasy. But I shrugged it off. It was probably a prank, a weird coincidence. I didn't tell Ella. There didn't seem to be any point in worrying her. That night, around 7:45 p.m., Ella spilled the glass of water on the carpet. She cursed softly, and I laughed, just like the letter had said. We went for our walk, just like usual, past Mrs. Harris's house. And when we came back home, we sat down on the couch and watched TV. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then the second letter came. It was the same as the first, an envelope in the mailbox, no return address, nothing. This time, though, it felt different, like a sense of dread that followed me as I picked it up. The letter read, "Tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. you'll find a red car parked outside your house. The driver will be watching you. He's been watching you for weeks, but you haven't noticed. He'll leave just before you notice him. You will wonder who he is. You'll tell yourself it's nothing, but deep down, you'll know it's not." I remember my heart racing as I read those words. A red car watching me. I looked out the window to check, but of course, there was nothing there. I had no idea what it meant, but the feeling of being watched was too real. The next day, around 2:30 p.m., I glanced out the window, half expecting to see a red car. And sure enough, there it was. A beat-up sedan parked across the street. I couldn't see the driver, but I had this feeling, like someone was staring straight at me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my stomach dropped. I turned away, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But something told me that the letter had been right. I'd never seen that car before. I stayed inside, avoiding looking out the window, but that night there was another letter. "Tonight you'll hear a knock at your door at exactly 11 p.m. When you open it, there will be no one there. But if you look closely, you'll see footprints in the grass leading up to your porch. They'll disappear as you watch. Then you'll hear a soft whisper. It'll be faint, but you'll hear it." I felt the pit in my stomach grow heavier. This was getting out of hand. Ella and I had been joking around about how weird it was, but deep down, I could feel the creeping dread setting in. This didn't feel like a prank anymore. At 11 p.m., there was a knock. I froze, staring at the door. My pulse raced. I opened it. Nothing. I stepped outside onto the porch, looking around, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But when I looked down, I saw them, footprints in the grass, fresh ones, leading right up to the edge of the porch. And just like the letter said, they vanished as I stood there. I couldn't breathe. My heart hammered in my chest. Then, just as I was about to close the door, I heard it. A faint whisper. It was barely audible, like someone was right behind me, but I couldn't see anyone. I slammed the door shut. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. And the letters kept coming. Every day, every night, they described moments from my life that hadn't happened yet. But once they arrived, they always came true. and each event became darker. There was no way this was a coincidence anymore. The letters grew more specific, more intrusive. They described things that no one could have known about me. The time I dropped my keys and couldn't find them. The moment I realized I'd left my phone in the car. The way Ella looked at me when I asked her if she'd ever noticed anyone strange in the neighborhood. It was like someone was living in my life, watching everything, writing everything down. Then came the final letter. It was simple, almost casual. Tomorrow you'll find a new letter in your mailbox. This will be the last letter. I waited for it, and sure enough, it arrived. But there was nothing written inside it, just a single, perfectly printed sentence. You've been watched the whole time, Mark. You'll never see them coming. I went to the police, told them everything, but they couldn't do anything. The letters kept coming, even after that. And now, weeks later, I still get them. I don't know where they come from or who's sending them, but I know one thing for sure. They're always right. And every time I see that envelope, I know something dark is about to happen. The worst part? I know the next one is going to be worse. I keep telling myself it's nothing, but I can't shake the feeling that something is waiting for me in the dark. Watching. Sometimes the scariest part isn't the things that happen. It's knowing they're still out there, waiting. Story 7. I've never been one for paranoia. I mean, who really has the time for that, right? My life was simple, routine. Wake up, go to work, eat, sleep. The kind of life where the biggest thrill was catching a new episode of my favorite series before crashing into bed. Nothing ever really felt out of place. I'm Nathan. I'm 32, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of the city. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. The houses are all neat, the lawns are trimmed, and the streets are practically empty by 10 p.m. I've always liked the quiet. It made me feel safe. I'm a software developer, so I work from home most days. My office is in the back of the house, overlooking the street. Nothing fancy. It's just me and my dog, Max. We'd walk the neighborhood when I needed a break, but mostly I kept to myself. The neighbors were nice enough, but we were never particularly close. It wasn't like I had anything to hide. I just preferred the solitude. I had one thing that I paid attention to every morning without fail, my CCTV footage. I'd check it religiously, not because I was paranoid, but because I liked to keep an eye on things. The cameras outside were an extra layer of security, you know? I didn't think much of it until something started showing up, something that wasn't there before. It started small, barely noticeable. One morning, I noticed a figure on the footage standing outside my door at exactly 2:15 a.m., just standing there. It was odd because I hadn't heard anything the night before. I told myself it was just a glitch, maybe a tree or shadow playing tricks on the camera. But the next night, the same thing happened. 2:15 a.m., the same figure, standing there for 6 minutes before walking away. I brushed it off. Maybe it was someone from the neighborhood, a delivery driver, or just some random person passing through. I didn't think much of it, but it kept happening, every night at exactly 2:15 a.m. I started to wonder if maybe it was a neighbor, just stopping by for some reason I didn't know about. The strange thing was, the figure never seemed to move closer. It just stood there, always positioned in the same spot, facing my door. It made no sense, but it wasn't threatening, at least not at first. I mentioned it to a friend of mine, Josh. He laughed it off, said I was just being paranoid. Maybe it's just some late-night wanderer. Nothing to worry about, man. He was right, of course. It could have been nothing. I wanted to believe that. But then, on the 5th night, something changed. I remember it so clearly. I had just finished my work for the day, sat down with a beer, and decided to check the footage before bed. It was 2:15 a.m., like clockwork. The figure appeared, tall, cloaked in shadow, standing in the same spot. I was about to close the app when something froze me. The figure turned toward the camera. I don't know how to describe the feeling. Like an electric jolt shot through me. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. For a long moment, it didn't move. Then, in the most unsettling way possible, it leaned forward slightly. And that's when it whispered, "Nathan." My blood ran cold. I felt paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My name. It knew my name. I don't know how. I hadn't told anyone about the figure, not even Josh. My head spun. I watched as the figure slowly turned back and walked away, just like it always did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I wanted to call the police. I really did. But how do you explain something like that? "Oh, officer, there's a person standing outside my door every night at the same time. And last night, they said my name." They'd think I was crazy. That night, I barely slept. I kept the camera feed open on my phone, just staring at it, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. The streets were quiet. My house felt too quiet. The next day, I went out and bought a stronger lock for the door. Maybe it was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. I changed my routine, stayed up later, but no matter what, at exactly 2:15 a.m., the figure appeared again, and it kept turning, whispering my name. I couldn't take it anymore. I installed new lights outside, hoping they'd deter whoever it was, but the next night, there was no figure at 2:15 a.m. I felt a brief moment of relief, but then, as I checked the footage the next morning, something else appeared. A message. On the screen, barely visible in the corner of the camera, was a single word. Why? I don't know what it means or why it's happening. I just know that the figure is still out there, and I can't shake the feeling that it's waiting for me. I haven't checked the footage today. Maybe I never will again. Maybe it's better not to know. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens in the moment. It's the feeling that something is still out there, something that knows more about you than you can ever understand. And you have no idea when it'll be back. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the most unsettling things aren't the ones you see. It's the ones you don't. Story 8. I still remember the first time I saw it, the playground that appeared out of nowhere. It was one of those strange things you couldn't ignore but didn't know how to explain. Maybe I should have known that the moment we saw it, things were never going to be the same. But back then, it was just a weird story I'd tell friends, a quick laugh shared with a drink or two. Little did I know, it would haunt me forever. Let me back up a bit. My name's James, and I was 28 years old at the time. I'd just moved back into my old neighborhood after a few years of college. It was a peaceful suburb, the kind where you get home from work and walk your dog around quiet streets. The kind where people still leave their garages open and wave at their neighbors from across the driveway. The kind of place where you get used to the mundane rhythm of things. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. I liked it that way. Life felt ordinary, safe, even boring. Honestly, I needed it after the chaos of college life. I was renting a small place just off the main street, a one-bedroom unit with a view of the park. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I didn't mind the quiet. In fact, I loved it. After work, I'd make dinner, catch up on my favorite shows, and occasionally grab a beer at the local bar. My life was nothing to write home about, but that's the way I liked it. One evening, I was walking my dog, Max, around the park when I noticed something that didn't belong. It was subtle at first, a new swing set standing out in the corner of the park. It wasn't there the day before. But that wasn't the strange part. No, the strange part was how perfect it looked. The paint on the swings was pristine, the metal gleaming under the streetlights. The grass around it was freshly mowed, and the playground as a whole seemed far too clean for a place that had been neglected for years. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe the town had finally decided to do something about the park. But that night, something bothered me. I kept thinking about how new it looked, how it almost seemed to have appeared overnight. I told myself it was nothing, just a random town project. But something about it didn't sit right with me. The next day, as I walked Max through the park again, I saw a few kids playing on the swings, laughing as they took turns going higher and higher. There was a dad sitting on the bench nearby, watching them. His smile was wide, but something about his gaze was a little too intense, too focused. I caught his eye for a second, and he looked away almost immediately, his hands gripping the bench a little too tightly. I figured it was nothing, just a parent enjoying the day with his kids, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. By the third day, more kids started showing up. They'd play for hours, running across the fresh grass, laughing, shouting. But here's the thing. After a while, something changed. The laughter, it didn't sound the same. It started to feel different, almost too happy, too fake. It didn't feel like kids having fun anymore. It felt like something else, but I couldn't pinpoint what. I brushed it off. People can get weird sometimes. Maybe it was just me. I was starting to work longer hours, trying to get a promotion at the firm, so I didn't have time to pay much attention to the playground anyway. But then, one evening, I noticed it again. I was walking back from the store, and as I passed the park, I heard something strange, a faint giggle, like a child's laugh, but it sounded wrong. It didn't sound real. I looked around, but the park was empty. The swings were moving on their own, creaking as they swung back and forth in the wind. There were no kids, no adults, just an empty playground under the dim streetlights. I laughed it off. Maybe I was just tired, overworked. Maybe I'd had too much coffee. But the next morning, as I walked past the park again, I saw the swings were still moving. The air was still, the trees were still. But the swings, they kept moving. Like someone was still on them, only no one was there. And that's when I heard it. The laughing. Soft at first, distant, almost like it was coming from behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the park, empty as always. But the sound, it was real. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, like someone was whispering in my ear. Only no one was there. I told myself it was nothing. It had to be. But then, the kids started coming home. And that's when I began to notice the first real change. You know how children are, loud, energetic, always full of stories about their day. But these kids, they were different. They'd walk back into their homes, heads down, quiet. Their faces were pale, drained, like something had sucked the life out of them. I didn't see the usual sparkle in their eyes. Instead, there was something empty. I tried asking one of the kids, a boy named Adam who lived down the street. I'd seen him playing at the park almost every day. I asked him, "Hey, Adam, how's the playground? You like it?" He stared at me for a long moment. His lips trembled as he whispered, "It's fun, but it's not what it seems." He quickly ran inside, the door slamming behind him. I didn't know what to make of it. I thought it was just the kid being strange, maybe playing some game. But then more kids came home the same way, quiet, hollow. And that's when it hit me. Something was wrong with that playground, but I couldn't figure out what. I kept asking around, but the adults, They didn't seem to notice. One evening, I decided to see it for myself. It was late after midnight, and I was walking Max again. The park was still, the only sound the distant hum of the city in the background. But when I reached the playground, I heard it again. The laughing. It was clearer now, closer. I turned, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the park was empty. The swings still swayed gently in the breeze. I walked closer. The sound of the laughter grew louder, almost as if it was coming from inside the playground. I approached the swings, and that's when I saw it. The moment I stepped inside the playground, I felt it. A coldness, not the kind of cold you feel when the weather shifts. No, this was something different. A coldness that sank into your bones, a feeling that told you something was watching you. The laughter stopped for a moment, only to return, louder now. I spun around again, but no one was there. Just the empty, perfectly manicured playground. I backed up, heart racing, and that's when I saw it. A shadow moving on the other side of the playground, just beyond the slide. I froze, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. But the shadow didn't move like a person. It was stretching toward me, pulling itself along the ground. I ran. I don't know how long I was running, but when I reached my front door, I slammed it shut and locked it behind me. I felt sick. I wanted to call someone, tell them what happened, but I couldn't make sense of it. Who would believe me? And as I sat in my living room, heart pounding, I heard it again. The faint sound of laughing, soft but unmistakable. And the next day, it was worse. The kids were worse. They didn't speak to anyone, didn't look anyone in the eye. And the adults, they just kept walking past the playground like it was normal, like nothing had changed. I wanted to scream, to stop them, but what could I say? What was there to say? Days turned into weeks. The playground became a fixture of the neighborhood, like it had always been there. But I couldn't stop thinking about those kids, about the laughter, about the coldness that I felt when I stepped inside. The worst part? It never stopped. The laughing, the feeling of being watched, it never stopped. I moved out a few months later, but I'm still haunted by it. Every time I pass that neighborhood, I wonder if the playground is still there. I wonder if the kids are still changed. And sometimes I wonder if it'll find me again. So if you ever see a new playground appear overnight, don't go near it. Don't let the laughter fool you. It's not the kind of fun you want to have, because once you step inside, there's no going back. Story 9. I never thought anything like this would happen to me. It was just a normal night, a normal suburb, a normal neighborhood. At least, that's how it felt at first. My name's Josh, and I live in a small suburban town on the outskirts of the city. I was 28 at the time this all started, and honestly, life was pretty routine. I had a 9-to-5 job at an insurance company, nothing too exciting. I didn't live in some big city, and there were no crazy adventures, just the usual. My parents lived about an hour away, and I had a couple of close friends from college, but we mostly kept to ourselves. The neighborhood was quiet, calm, and overall a little too boring. If you ask anyone, they'd tell you that it was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. But that all changed. It started small. Nothing big at first. Nothing that would make you think it was anything to worry about. Just a strange feeling, an odd vibe that I couldn't quite place. I'd been working from home more often during that period, and I remember it being a particularly cold winter. The chill of the air even seeped into the house, making the living room feel a little too empty at night. On one of those nights, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through social media, when I noticed something out the window. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. I lived on a cul-de-sac, and my view was mostly the backyards of my neighbors. But that night, I saw a figure. At first, I thought it was just someone walking, maybe a neighbor taking a late-night jog or some kids sneaking around. But then, the person started running. Not jogging or walking fast, but sprinting, like they were in a hurry, like they were chasing something or trying to escape. It was strange, and the oddest part was how fast they moved. They were gone in a blink, disappearing between the houses before I could even fully process it. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just a jogger or someone rushing home after a late shift, but deep down, something didn't sit right. That was the first time I saw it. The next night, I saw the same thing. A figure sprinting across the cul-de-sac. This time, I was more alert, and I decided to check it out. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, looking up and down the street. There was no one in sight, nothing unusual. Just the usual quiet, suburban night. I told myself it was probably someone being goofy or a late-night runner. I even considered it might be a prank. But then, it kept happening. Every night, like clockwork, at exactly 2:17 a.m., this person would run through the street, the same speed, the same direction, always sprinting, always disappearing between the houses. And no one ever seemed to notice. I started to get curious, almost obsessed. I started recording it on my phone, just in case anyone else thought I was losing my mind. I tried talking to my neighbors about it. No one had seen anything. It was almost like they were avoiding the topic altogether. "Oh, it's probably just someone from the next block over," one of them said. But there was something in their tone, something like they knew more than they were letting on. One night, I decided to chase them. I don't know why. Maybe I was just tired of feeling paranoid, or maybe I thought I'd finally catch a glimpse of the person. I set up my phone camera to record from my front porch, and I waited. It wasn't long before the figure appeared again, running faster than anyone could humanly run. This time, I bolted after them, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I ran across my front yard and down the sidewalk, my breath heavy in the cold night air. But just as I reached the end of the street, the figure vanished between two houses. I stopped dead in my tracks. There was no sound, no movement. They were just gone. I stood there, staring at the empty space where they had disappeared. My mind raced. How could someone move that fast and then just vanish? I was sure they'd been right there just a second ago. I felt ridiculous. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was all in my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. And then, one night, it happened. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone like usual when I saw the figure again. Only this time, I didn't immediately run outside. I stayed in bed, watching through the window, my heart pounding in my chest. And that's when I saw it. The figure didn't just run past me. It stopped. It turned around and looked directly at me. The streetlight above them illuminated their face. For a moment, I couldn't believe it. It was my face. I couldn't breathe. My stomach churned. I watched, frozen, as the figure, my exact face, stared back at me with wide, empty eyes. And then, just like every other night, they sprinted off into the darkness. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. I had to be seeing things, but there was no mistaking it. I had seen my own reflection in the darkness, clear as day. I could hardly sleep that night. The feeling of dread was suffocating. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I kept checking my phone to see if I'd recorded anything, but the footage was blurry, hard to make out. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that figure, my own face. That's when the visits started. It wasn't just the running anymore. I began finding small things around my yard, a piece of clothing, a scrap of paper with my handwriting on it, though I didn't recognize the note. And at first it was subtle, but then it became more obvious. Something was trying to get my attention. I started avoiding the windows at night. I kept the blinds closed, but I could still feel their presence. It was like they were watching me, even when I wasn't looking. One night, everything came to a head. I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my window. I wasn't sure if it was the figure or just my mind playing tricks on me. But then, the doorbell rang. At 3 a.m., I froze. I didn't move. I didn't want to answer the door, but something inside told me I had to. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it through the peephole. Nothing. I hesitated, my hand trembling on the doorknob. It felt like someone was standing on the other side waiting, and then I heard it. A whisper. "Josh, open the door." It was my own voice. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering in my chest. Whoever or whatever was out there knew my name. They knew things about me. They knew me. I didn't know what to do. I called the police, but they didn't take me seriously. "It's probably just a prank, son. You need to calm down," they said. But this was no prank. This was something real, something dangerous. After that night, I packed my things. I moved out of that house. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't risk whatever it was coming after me again. I never found out who or what it was. The police never found any evidence. The strange occurrences stopped, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was still out there, watching me. It's been months since I left that town, and I still look over my shoulder sometimes. I still lock all the doors, keep the blinds drawn, because no matter how safe I feel, no matter how far I run, I'll never forget the feeling of seeing my own face running through the night, disappearing into the dark. Sometimes, the scariest part isn't what happens to you. It's knowing it could happen again. Story 10. I've thought about it for years, even tried to forget it, but something about it keeps nagging at the back of my mind. I can't shake the feeling that maybe I never really escaped. You'll understand by the end. Let me start at the beginning, so you know where I'm coming from. My name is Alex, and I was 28 when it all started. At the time, I was living in a small suburban neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but nothing too rundown either. It was one of those places where everyone knew everyone, and you didn't even lock your doors at night, thinking nothing bad could happen in a place like that. I had a job as an assistant manager at a grocery store, not glamorous, but it paid the bills. It wasn't much of a life, really, just work, the occasional trip to the pub with friends, and my apartment that I barely had time to spend in. My family was mostly back in another state, and it was just me, living my uneventful, safe little life in the suburbs. It was ordinary, boring even, and to be honest, that's what I liked about it. The house next door to mine had been vacant for months. The owners had left suddenly. No one really knew why. One day there was just a for sale sign in front of it, and the windows stayed dark. It didn't bother me. The whole neighborhood was quiet, but that house? It had an eerie stillness about it. Maybe it was just me, but it felt wrong. I didn't like looking at it, especially at night. Something about the way the shadows played across the front door just made me feel uneasy. But I told myself it was just my imagination. Then, the sounds started. It was the first week of November. Cold, crisp air had started sweeping in, and the sky was that dull gray color it gets when winter's coming. I'd just finished a long shift and was getting ready to head to bed. I live alone, so when I got home at night, it was usually quiet. Too quiet. But that night, there was something different. At first, I thought it was just my neighbors, maybe the ones across the street had their TV up too loud, or the couple 2 doors down were having an argument. It wasn't unusual for noise to travel through thin walls, especially in old houses like ours. But then I heard it again, a sound that didn't belong. It started with crying, soft, muffled sobs that seemed to drift through the thin walls. It wasn't the kind of crying you'd hear from a child or even a person upset. It sounded more hollow, distant, as if it was coming from far away, but somehow closer at the same time. At first, I thought it was just the wind or something, but then it stopped. Dead silent. A few minutes later, I heard something else. Laughter. High-pitched, almost maniacal, but again, muffled. It echoed in my ears, making my skin crawl. I froze. It was too dark outside for anyone to be out there, and the house across the street was empty. I couldn't even see anyone through my window. But still, the laughter persisted, followed by the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Steps. They weren't in rhythm with the laughter. They were the footsteps of someone wandering around aimlessly. But they were too real, too clear to ignore. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security cameras. I didn't want to seem crazy, but I needed to check. Nothing. The street was empty, no one walking around. The lights in the abandoned house next door were out, yet the sounds kept coming. My heart started to race, and for a moment, I thought I had imagined it all. Maybe it was exhaustion catching up with me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next night, the sounds came back. This time, it wasn't crying or laughter. It was scratching. It started faintly, as if someone was dragging their nails down a chalkboard. It made my skin crawl, the way it seemed to get louder and then fade, only to return louder again. I looked at my phone again, checked the cameras. The same eerie nothingness outside. That's when I realized it wasn't just sounds in the night. It was my own sounds. I'd hear things in my own apartment, things I thought were normal. Footsteps behind me, doors creaking, a faint laugh as if someone was right beside me. And every time, they'd be mimicked by the sounds from the house next door. I wasn't the only one hearing it. I talked to my neighbor, Gina, across the street, and she was visibly shaken. She had heard the same things. She had heard her own footsteps in the middle of the night, like someone was walking through her house when she was asleep. And there were nights when it was impossible to sleep. The sounds would start off softly, laughter, the faint scrape of something against the wall, but then they would escalate. Sometimes it felt like the house was right next to me, not abandoned but alive, breathing. Gina mentioned that her husband, Tom, thought she was going crazy. She'd even called the police once, but they couldn't find anything. No one saw a thing. And then the sounds started, following me, shifting. One evening, I was sitting in my living room, reading. The usual sounds started again. Footsteps, whispering, soft crying. But this time, I heard something different. A voice. It was faint, like someone talking in the next room. It was my voice speaking my name. I froze, heart pounding. I stood up and ran to the front door, unlocked it and threw it open, half expecting to see someone standing in front of me. No one. The street was as still as ever. But then I turned and saw it. The window of the abandoned house. It was slightly cracked open. That's when I realized something far worse than the sounds was happening. Something was watching me, or worse, mimicking me. The footsteps in my house weren't just footsteps. They were a copy of mine. The cries weren't random. They were echoes of the moments I was living. It felt like the house was stealing my life, one sound at a time. I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. But every time I tried to leave, the sounds followed. Everywhere I went, the footsteps echoed in time with mine. I didn't know who or what was doing this, but it was stalking me. The worst part? I never knew when it would stop. I went to the police again, but once more, they didn't take me seriously. "It's just an old house," they said, but I knew it wasn't. Something in that house, something unnatural, was reaching into my life, and I couldn't escape it. The final straw came one night when I saw something I'll never forget. I was looking out my window when I saw it, a shadow in the window of the abandoned house. It was faint, but I knew it wasn't a trick of the light. It was a person. I don't know what happened next. Maybe panic took over. I grabbed my things, called Gina, and ran to her house. I didn't go back that night, and I haven't been back since. Time passed, and the sounds stopped. But now, months later, I can still hear them sometimes. Faint footsteps in my kitchen, a soft laugh when I'm lying in bed. And no matter how far I move, no matter where I go, I always feel the weight of those eyes on me. It's like the house is still following me, copying everything I do, waiting for me to return. I'm not sure what it wants or what it was, but if you live anywhere near an abandoned house, just remember, sometimes the sounds you hear aren't just the house settling. Sometimes they're waiting for you to make the next move. And if you hear your own footsteps, don't turn around. You might just see something that isn't you. The scariest part? It's not over. It's still out there. If you made it this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more stories that might just keep you up at night.